This is an 8-iron, and it's a dead shank.
Wow.
Way right.
Oh, takes a hop
shank.
off the path.
You gotta be kidding me. Very tough pitch shot right here. You gotta hit it into the hill, one hop up and bite, and it's in.
Kind of like that.
Well, I would like to welcome NBC and Golf Channel analyst, golf course architect, and this gentleman also wears about a million other hats, it seems, these days, and I'm super excited to have Mark Rolfing on the Sub 70 podcast. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time today. I've really been looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me, Jason. It's been a little bit overdue, I think, by now, so probably a lot for you and I to talk about today.
Well, my first one has to be, how did a guy growing up in DeKalb, Sycamore area of Illinois, wind up becoming Mr. Hawaii in the golf world? How did you wind up from the cornfields over to the beautiful oceans of Hawaii?
You know, I think it was just fate more than anything else. I had dreams like so many young kids in Illinois, whether it's baseball, football, basketball. Mine were golf, and you know, I got to be a pretty good high school player, and then even better in college, and pretty soon thought I was going to be the next Jack Nicklaus, and that just was never going to be the case, but you couldn't convince me of that. You know, I finally, after batting it around the tours of Europe and Asia and all over the world, and starting and stopping on the PGA Tour, I finally kind of packed it in and said, you know what, I'm not good enough, and had played in the Hawaiian Open in 1976 and kind of liked Hawaii, and met a girl that I also kind of liked, and we went out there for a little vacation and basically never left.
When you're living in Hawaii, like, you know, there's always this misconception of, I think, a little bit of, you know, can you get island fever quickly, that kind of thing. What did you kind of notice from living in the Midwest or in the mainland and going to the island, of what maybe some of those biggest differences are? And, you know, obviously you love it. What did you find the most joy about living in Hawaii, I guess is what I'm asking, versus, you know, where you sort of grew up, which is also a wonderful place, but there's got to be a difference of culture, the whole 9 yards, I would have to imagine.
Yeah, I think at first, now you got to remember, we were in the 70s back then, so really no internet. And yes, when you went to Hawaii, you really got away from things. You know, people weren't going out there on a regular basis to visit friends of mine or things like that. So it really was getting away. I think more than anything else, I fell in love with the ocean. I fell in love with the sea, maybe growing up in cornfields of DeKalb, Illinois, and being sort of landlocked. You know, we would get to Lake Michigan maybe once a year. I just was infatuated with the whole sea and ocean, and kind of fell in love with it. And I had no dreams at that point of sort of reconnecting with the golf world in terms of television. There was just, you know, back then, if you were a major champion, you might have a chance to be a golf analyst on a network, but not really a very big one. The analysts were Ken Venturi at CBS and Lee Trevino at NBC, and Arnold Palmer did a little bit of work. Jack Nicklaus worked for ABC at the time. So if you hadn't won a bunch of majors, you had no chance. So I literally, when I went out there, I was done playing and kind of fell in love with Hawaii and figured I would sort of let the chips fall where they may out there.
You touched on this a little bit, you know, of playing professional golf and, you know, playing around the world. What were those tours like in the 70s, you know, early 80s, when you were making your, you know, start in the professional game? You had to come across some interesting characters playing those tours back in those days. It had to be, looking back, has to be quite was a traveling circus at some level when you're playing the European tour in that period of time, and over in Australia.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah. I had about 30 guys that I played the whole European tour 2 years. There were about 30 Americans that traveled. The year after, we had a really good Walker Cup team in 75, and a bunch of those guys had waited to turn pro and didn't go to the Q school in 75. So the next year they played Europe, and that was kind of the Gary Koch, Andy Bean. Oh, there was just a lot of really good players that were in that group. Jerry Pate was in the group. And, it was really fun. There were two ways that you could try to get better if you were a pro back then, and that was you could either play the mini tours, which I did some. I played Arizona and Southern California, primarily mini tours, or you could play the world tours, of which you had to qualify to get on them. But it was more like I felt like getting myself ready for the big tour if I could play in national opens. Like in Asia, in a 10-week stretch, I think I played in maybe 7 or 8 national championships. They weren't huge back then, but you were still playing in the Malaysian Open or the Indonesian Open or the Philippines Open, and it had a little more of a sense of being real tournament. And I thought I had a better chance of improving if I went that route. It was a hard way to make a living, but taught me a lot about myself, and more than anything, made me realize I just wasn't quite good enough. I got in a position a couple of times, to maybe win or do pretty well, and I just didn't have it coming down the stretch. I knew it.
You still play a lot of golf today?
I don't play as much as I used to. I had a really bad cancer a few years ago that, knock on wood, I beat, and it was a tough fight. The prognosis was not good. It was a head and neck cancer. And it sort of inhibited my mobility a little bit. I had to have a major surgery in my left jaw, shoulder area. I don't make much of a turn anymore. Typical what you hear from guys, I don't play that much, or my body aches or whatever. But I'm probably a good 5 or 6 handicap now, and that's likely to be what I'm going to be probably for the rest of my life. I'll bet my swing speed's about 90 miles an hour, and that's it.
Well, you can still get out and enjoy the game, right, as a 5 handicap. Like it's
absolutely
fun. Play the right tee box. It's such a great game that you can play it your whole life, and still enjoy it, even though you don't play as well as you once did. Still nothing better than getting out there for a few hours and playing golf and seeing the ocean if you're in Hawaii and enjoying it, right? I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
No, and the thing is, Jason, I see so many guys and women that just have expectations that are too high when they go out on a golf course. It is a very difficult game, and most amateurs are not as good as they think they are. They don't take enough club, when they're hitting shots into the greens. They hardly ever get the ball pin high. Their short games aren't nearly as good as they could be. That's an area where they could improve, and yet they go out and they don't perform the way they want, and then they're unhappy. And they should really keep things in perspective and create standards that are achievable and goals that are achievable. And that's sort of what I've done now. Yeah, every time I go out and play, doesn't matter what I shoot, I'm just happy to be out there playing.
Well, let's talk about some of the projects you're working on golf course-wise. I know the changes that Court Crenshaw is making to the Kapalua Resort with the Plantation Golf Course. What prompted you guys to kind of go back and take a look at that course and see what Bill and Ben could do to improve it? I thought it was a great track. I was fortunate enough to play it. I went over there for my honeymoon. It was fantastic. But I'm assuming it's going to be even better once you guys are kind of done sort of assessing it and having those guys come and kind of touch up their masterpiece a little bit there.
Yeah, it was an amazing process. I went around it this past Monday. The improvements are basically done. The grass is all planted. And what prompted us to do it is the fact that it's 30 years old. If you can imagine, it just doesn't seem possible. But the Plantation course is 30 years old. So the grass was getting a little tired. And, frankly, we're going through a little bit of a climate change out there in Hawaii. And it could be cyclical, but the course has changed over the years. It's gotten softer. There's much more rain than we've had in the past, so it's wetter out there. And what happened was the course became, in some ways, too easy for the best players in the world at the Tournament of Champions. They just shoot lights out. But because it's softened up and it plays so short now for them, that actually makes it play longer for the average player. So it got harder for the recreational golfers. So what we really tried to do in this restoration was make it so that it became easier for the recreational golfer and harder for the best players in the world. And the way to do that, Bill and Ben felt like, was to soften up the greens a little bit, calm them down, not have quite so many tough contours. And that's where the average golfer has the most trouble on those greens. And then we created a whole new set of teeing areas and challenges for the best players in the world. And it was a great experience. We had the same, obviously, Bill and Ben, but I was kind of the glue that helped Troon Golf, who manages Kapalua, and they do a great job there, kind of helped them get the group back together. And we literally had a guy by the name of Jimbo Wright, who built a number of the original Plantation Course greens, came back 30 years later to work on them again. Jeff Bradley, who did the bunkers 30 years ago, was there. We had two guys that just finished a renovation at Winter Park in Orlando, Keith Rebb and Riley Johns, golf course architects themselves. They were actually on the shapers. It was like an all-star renovation crew, and I think you are going to see some of the most dramatic results you've ever seen in a renovation. It is going to be spectacular when you tune in January.
I'm assuming, too, they also put some tee boxes to make the holes a little bit shorter for the guests that can come there for the resort. Sort of, we were talking about how it seems like in this, in the 90s, early 2000s, a lot of golf courses got really, really difficult for the average player. And it's nice to see like what's happening in Winter Park, and I'm assuming you guys probably did this there as well, to have some tee boxes for people to play the appropriate tees for their ability and how far they hit the golf ball. And I'm assuming that's expanded out as well.
It really has. I would think of all the mistakes that I made in the original planning of the course, I totally overlooked, the shorter recreational hitters. And some of those holes, the difference between the championship tees and the forward tees was probably only 40 or 50 yards, which, on a massive hole of 663, let's say like the 18th, is minimal. So, yes, we have, I'm going to say not quite half the holes, but almost half the holes created new areas. The other thing is, again, when the course opened, it played very firm and fast. You could roll the ball down those fairways, but it has softened up so much that there just is not the roll that you used to get out there. And consequently, it's forced us to go forward. And we even have gone forward with a championship tee at 18, because there was a year in the Tournament of Champions, the Century Tournament of Champions 2 years ago, where not a player in the field in 72 holes reached the green in 2 shots, which is almost unheard of on that hole. And so literally after going back, I think 4 or 5 times, building new tees further back over the 30 years, we finally had to build one further forward.
I think it's good for golf overall. I really do. Like I said, the guys who did the sculpting at Winter Park, I mean, I haven't played it yet, but I've heard, it's spectacular,
yeah.
And that nails it, right? And you can, I think, being in the golf business myself, I love to see that trend line happening of making a little more width off the tee and having the right tee boxes for people to enjoy it. I think it shouldn't be a torturous 4.5 hours. It should be fun. It's okay making a couple birdies and pars.
Yeah, think about this, Jason. If you think about really the issues, the challenges that you and I and everybody in the golf industry face, even the people that only participate in the golf industry, the challenges are the game is too difficult, particularly for beginning golfers. It takes too long, and it costs too much. And one of the components that has added to all 3 of those issues and created problems in all 3 of those areas is the length of the golf course. It takes longer to play. It costs more money to maintain, bigger spaces, and consequently you have to pass that along to the consumer, and it makes the game more difficult. They're shooting higher scores. So, I'm all for starting to scale back this whole need for length. I really don't think you do. And just take a look at how great Pebble Beach played in this U.S. Open this year. Just like Marion. Look at the scores. Everybody thought they'd shoot 15 under at Marion at that U.S. Open, and, it was even par. So length is something we really have to take into consideration going forward, especially if you're building a new golf course.
Well, another project I know I read about you working on, which I think is just fascinating, I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation of this, but is the little 9-holer called the Cayuga Golf Course, which from the pictures looks like it has just fantastic bones, has like a links look to it, which I absolutely love links golf. How's that project coming along? And once again, it's sort of one of those golf courses for everyone to play. It's manageable. I love the backstory of trying to bring that little thing to life a little bit more and kind of get more people participating out there with it.
Yeah, so the name of the place is Kahuku, and it's on the north shore of Oahu. I will tell you this. I believe that Kahuku is the best remaining golf course site in America. And I'm talking about mainland, East Coast, West Coast, interior of the country. I believe this is the best site remaining. It's remote on that island, yes, but it is totally sand-based. There's almost 1.5 miles of oceanfront there, and there's a little 9-hole course there right now. It was built back in the late 30s by the plantation workers out there, and it's just a fascinating little 9 holes. There's no irrigation system at all, so it's a little bit scruffy, but it actually plays very nicely. I think the total staff, accounting maintenance and pro shop, of which is just a little trailer kind of thing, is 5. For the local people there, if they can buy a ticket, a pass that costs them $9 around out there now, and I think visitors is maybe in mid-20s. But those kind of places these days are not really sustainable anymore. It's very difficult, with that low a revenue base to have a 9-hole course that's sustainable, and it's owned by the city and county of Honolulu. And they're losing money, and just like every other city in America, whether it's Seattle or it was the case in Orlando before they renovated Winter Park, what are they going to do? How are they going to keep losing money? They can't afford to do it. And so I think there are going to have to be some upgrades out of Kahuku. I think there's plenty of room if you wanted to add more holes, but just a little finishing work, kind of returning it to the links that originally was built there. Because it is total links land, and every hole is, right on the ocean. It's just it's a puzzle that I haven't quite solved yet, but one that I'm gonna. This is probably the project of them all, including the big one in Chicago. I think Kahuku has the most sentiment for me. I really want to try and figure out how that works, because to me, that is a microcosm of golf right now. If we can't make that work, I think the game in general is in trouble.
Well, I was going to get to the Chicago stuff, but I'll still start off with golf in Chicago. And, besides Kishwaukee Country Club in DeKalb, which is a fantastic track where I'm very proud to be a member and have been for a long time, A, what makes Chicago such a great golf city? And then B, what are, your 2 or 3 favorites to go play that when you get back here that you try to get out and go and see?
Well, let me say this. Chicago, and I'm biased. I'll be the first to admit it. I'm biased. But Chicago is the greatest golf town in America, period. I suppose Philadelphia could argue the same, maybe. Boston, you might hear. I don't know. But to me, it's not even really close. Chicago's had 13 U.S. Opens, which is a lot of U.S. Opens. But the most amazing thing about that, Jason, is that of those 13 U.S. Opens, they played on 8 different courses in Chicagoland, which shows you the depth of the quality of the courses. Are we going to have another U.S. Open in Chicago? I don't know. The problem is the facilities in Chicago just aren't that big. They aren't big enough to handle a U.S. Open in today's world, but that doesn't at all take away from the quality of the courses. I love the north side. I've been a north side Chicago guy my whole life. I like it way, way, way north. Up there, Shore Acres is one of my favorite, but you've got a little area down there in Lake Forest with Onwencia and Knollwood and Conway Farms, and you've probably got 3 or 4 courses right in there, that might have the quality of golf holes that could host a U.S. Open. And really, all of Chicago, the western suburbs. I played out at Medina a week ago Monday in the Robbie Gold celebrity fundraiser out there. I love that, and I still can't get over what happened in that Ryder Cup in 2012. Every time I play the course now, I just am shocked that America lost that thing. I don't know how we did, but there's a lot of great western suburban courses. I wish Butler National would invite a woman to be a member of that club, because I think they could host the U.S. Open again. And then the southwest side, I played a lot of junior golf in the Chicago District Golf Association events, and loved those courses down, Olympia Fields and Idlewild and Flossmoor, and just a number of courses in that area that are just phenomenal. So it's got variety, really the only weak area in Chicago when it comes to quality golf is downtown. The outside of the apple is shiny and bright. It's the core of the apple that's a little bit stale. And that's why we decided to start working on the project at Jackson Park.
Well, that flows perfectly into my next question. What a cool concept with the project that's going on and working with President Obama and Tiger Woods. It's pretty amazing. How did you get involved, and how is the process coming at this point in time, and when do you potentially see the facility being open?
Well, I got involved literally as much as anything because of my cancer. I had my surgery at the University of Chicago Hospital, and it was fairly soon after the Ryder Cup was in Chicago, and the hospital was right down there on Jackson Park Golf Course. And even though I grew up in Chicagoland, I had never played Jackson Park, and I didn't even know that South Shore Golf Course was there. And I started snooping around and getting interested and tried to figure out why in the middle of August there weren't a lot of kids playing golf. Nobody was playing golf there, and the courses were kind of ratty. And I just felt like, wow, this ought to, pique my interest a little bit, and it did. And frankly, there was a number of things that happened along the way that were pretty interesting. One was the Obama Presidential Center. Once it got decided that was going to be on Jackson Park, which is effectively his home course, and he's going to move back to Hyde Park here in a couple of years. And so, that gave a real jolt of energy to, wow, maybe we can really change this community. And the golf course literally is the front yard of where that presidential center is going to be. I had put together a totally different plan for Jackson and South Shore, which literally was going to be more of just a smaller restoration to try and get the courses so they were sustainable. They really needed some significant upgrading, and pretty much had decided that it was going to be Bill Coore and Ben Crenshaw to do that. And what we're really thinking about a tournament or, a President's Cup or who knows what. And all of a sudden one day I get this call from Mark Steinberg, Tiger's agent, saying that President Obama had called him up to talk to him about Jackson Park. And the conversation was something like, hey, Tiger, do you know this guy Mark Rolfing? Tiger said, yeah, I know Mark Rolfing, known him for 25 years, for 20 years. And he said, why? And he said, well, he's doing something up in Chicago with my golf course here. Do you know anything about that? And I laughed when I heard that he referred to it as his golf course, which is a good thing. Anyway, he basically said to Tiger, I think you should be the architect of this thing, so you better call Mark up and figure out how you guys can work together on this thing. And to shorten the story up, he basically did, I think he came 6 days later to visit, which is pretty unusual for him. Fell in love with it. He wondered where the kids were too. We knew there were some huge challenges. You had to connect the two courses, which means an underpass under Lakeshore Drive. We needed three underpasses total that had to be approved in a state budget. But that all came together through the Presidential Center and the need for infrastructure for the community. So it basically wasn't just, building underpasses to improve the golf. And I think we are almost there. I would say, there's a really, really good chance we'll be under construction next year. That's the plan. I don't think fundraising is going to be an issue. We've got some tremendous support right now. Mike Kaiser, who was my partner at Sand Hills, and of course is Band and Dunes and Dunes Club and a number of very, very famous courses around the world, is pretty much our lead partner here, and he's kind of our guiding light. And it's all coming together. And I think by 2022, people are going to be playing golf on an improved and combined South Shore and Jackson Park.
And it's interesting with Tiger's architectural work, but it's been, really well regarded. Like what he did at Blue Jack National outside of Houston, it looks absolutely, fantastic. And the reviews have been great of, him as an architect. And he hasn't done that many courses yet, but so far it's been really, really good. What kind of course are you guys looking at building? Would it be a traditional Parkland style golf course? Is there any sort of a theme, because there's some holes in the water? What sort of overall vibe will the course sort of have, or how does Tiger see it from a architectural standpoint?
I don't think there's a theme in terms of the character of the course other than playable. It has to be something that's playable. The users, the golfers in that area, for the most part, are not great. There's a lot of diversity there, a lot of minorities, a lot of senior citizens play. And so the number one goal Tiger has had from the beginning when he looked at it was, I got to figure out how to make these holes playable. There's actually a few holes out there now that are too difficult, that are not playable. On the other hand, South Shore has this opportunity to build 3 or 4 truly amazing, spectacular lakefront holes in an urban area in America, which is just unheard of. So the overall theme is going to be playability, but the character of the courses is going to change between South Shore, which is going to be lakefront, almost all of that lakefront, and then you're going to go under the underpass, under Lakeshore Drive, and you're going to come out at what is now Jackson Park, and then all the way from there up to Cornell Avenue, which is where the Presidential Center is going to be. That's all pretty much parkland. So it's going to have 2 completely different feels to it.
Would the goal be to eventually have a PGA Tour event there, and that would be kind of the host site to have it in the city of Chicago? Is that sort of the overall goal of, yes, you want it playable for the people who live there, but gosh, having a tour event in Chicago would be like the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, I think it would. There's a couple of discussions that are going on. One is the BMW Championship, which is no longer going to be BMW. They're looking for a sponsor, and I think they will find one. But, the thought there would be, I think it'd be cool to continue to rotate that around Chicagoland. So maybe you went up to the north, one time up to north side like Conway, where they played 3 times, I think, west, which they're doing this year at Medina, southwest, which they're doing next year at Olympia, and then maybe one time downtown at Jackson Park. But I also think there's a number of other events that would be attractive, particularly for that site. And the one that comes to mind first for everybody is the President's Cup, because you got the President of the United States, you've got the captain, and arguably the greatest player of all time, Tiger Woods. He's the captain of the President's Cup this year. How can we not be thinking about a President's Cup? And really, when you look at this site, it's very much like Liberty National, where they had the last President's Cup in the U.S., although, believe it or not, Jackson Park in South Shore is much bigger because there's an entire park around it. Liberty National is a pretty tiny site. But because Jackson Park is so big, it was big enough to have the World's Fair, we literally feel like you're going to be able to have the World's Fair of golf there if you want. You don't have to build it all on the golf course itself. You've got the entire park you could use, let's say, during a President's Cup or some tournament like that.
That would be, I can't fathom, because for the city of Chicago and all the, everyone's such huge sports fans around here. President Obama kind of adopted son into this area. Can you imagine the energy that would be there for a President's Cup in that facility? It'd be amazing.
It would, and I think it would be a game changer for that community. We've seen what happened in Atlanta with the East Lake Foundation and the whole initiative by Tom Cousins down there that literally changed that community. And I think the same thing can happen at Jackson Park. Golf has an amazing way of changing people's views of things and just giving particularly kids the opportunity to go out there and play. And one of the big decisions that was made as part of this is that children under the age of 17, or kids now, can play golf free anywhere on any one of the Chicago Park District courses. That's one of the first things that Tiger said. Let's let the kids play some free golf. Not on Tuesday afternoon with your parents, or not, after 4 o'clock on Wednesday, or whatever it is. Anytime, any place, under 17 is free. I think that's going to be a game changer.
Yeah, I love it. One last Tiger question. You've been around professional golf for a long time and have seen all of the greats. Did you ever see, after everything Tiger had gone through physically, emotionally, the whole 9 yards, did you ever think he would be back to the level of consistency he got back to winning on the PGA Tour? And then did you ever think he could ever win another major again when you saw how hurt he was physically and all the surgeries, et cetera, et cetera? Was that ever on your radar?
No, it really wasn't. And I think where it hit me the hardest was at Torrey Pines, because I walked with him I think 36 of the 72 holes in that U.S. Open in 2008. And then, of course, I covered the playoff on Monday with Rocco and Tiger. And I could hear his knee. I could hear his leg. It was like crunching. It was the strangest thing. And just watching him and seeing the pain that was in and seeing the way he had to change the way he played. He just simply couldn't get through the shots. He had to stand up on it and hit these sort of cut shots that he knew he wasn't going to turn the ball right to left. It was going to be kind of a baby fade and probably end up in the right rough. But he was in so much pain, I thought that he's never, ever going to be able to recover from this. And, I knew, Jason, that if all the stars aligned, he could win maybe the Masters again. I felt like that would be the major if he was going to win one. But I also knew how hard it was for the stars to align because these majors, are getting tougher and tougher to win. You got some dominant players like Koepka, who seems to win all of them now. And then you've got, a group of players that haven't even won one yet that are so good you can't believe that Matt Kuchar hasn't won a major, or Ricky Fowler. So I think the majors are just going to get harder and harder to win, and that's why I was really kind of thinking Tiger wouldn't do it.
I always thought, too, with the start-stop, right, where he would play a few events, another injury, off 6 months, another surgery. I just thought, as good as these young players are, and he's going to be in his 40s, it's just not going to happen. I mean, I would have bet good money he could have put all the effort in, and he's just not going to be physically able to do it. And boy, was I wrong. Like, I think his golf swing looks fantastic right now. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen from a golfer who I thought truly was never going to be able to play at a championship level again. I mean, coming back looking 10 years younger, and the golf swing looks like he can control the ball and hit it both ways now. It's truly the most remarkable thing I've ever seen. I would have bet good money he never could beat the level of competition that's out there now, and boy, was I wrong. It's truly an amazing story. It really is.
Yeah, I was wrong, too. I still believe it's the greatest comeback in sports history, any sport. What amazed me was when he came back, I had said if he comes back, he's going to have to come back playing a different kind of game. He is not going to overpower courses. He's not going to be able to play with these kids tee to green the way he used to be able to play. And sure enough, he comes out and he's swinging 128 miles an hour. He's ranked second in clubhead speed on the PGA Tour for a few months there, and he's just, driving the ball a mile. But it really didn't work. I mean, it showed us signs of life. It showed us how much he wanted to play again and everything else. But he very quickly realized that he needed to gear back if he wanted to be the most efficient in being able to play a lot. Well, for him, a lot. It's not a lot for a lot of players, but he needed to gear back a little, and he's done that now. And the swing speed has slowed down, and everything is under control, and the swing looks as good as I've ever seen it. His iron game, I think, is nearly as good as it was at his peak. He's not nearly as good a putter as he was back then, and that's why he'll never play the way he played back in 2000. But it is remarkable to me what he's done, and I just wish everybody would kind of stop this, is he going to break Nicklaus's record now and all this? He may win another major, he may not. But let's just enjoy what he did, because it really is remarkable.
Hey everyone, it's Jason at the Sub 70 Podcast. Just want to let everybody know that the Sub 70 699 irons are back in stock. Sorry about the delay, but they sold out faster than we thought, but we do have inventory back in. If anyone needs fitting help or questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're always glad to help. And also our 639 MB and MB Plus blade irons are in stock as well. Two different versions. The original MB style will be a traditional blade, minimal offset, thinner top line, really, really workable, compact, definitely what the better players looking for from ball control and workability. The MB Plus is a little bit of a bigger blade, still thin top line, little more offset, little more heel to toe, a little more forgiveness built into it, but still the trajectory control that better players looking for in a blade, but still some forgiveness mixed in with it. So it's sort of the perfect combination. Both are still made from our DT4 soft steel, so you get that buttery forged feel with either set. Thanks again for listening. Hope you guys enjoy the podcast with Rolf. And without further ado, back to it. Well, speaking of major championships, we have another good one coming up here. My favorite of the year, the Open Championship, and it's so cool. It's coming to Royal Portrush. You know, it hasn't been there in, I think, since the 50s. So it has not been in the Rota. What are you hearing about the golf course, and what are you most excited to see in this upcoming championship?
I have been to Portrush a few times. In that little stint that I worked for ABC back in the early 90s, I covered the Senior British Open a couple of times at Portrush. I really like it. And I'm hearing that, it's going to be quite a test. The interesting thing about it is, the thing I love about golf is it's got these 4 major championships that all have their own personalities, and that are all so different. And of course, the Masters, I think, is the greatest golf tournament in the world, and really has a personality unlike any other sporting event. But to me, the Open Championship is the World Championship of golf. It's got the history, it's got the international feeling to it, and to me, it is literally the World Championship. And because of that, I think its place now as the 4th of the 4 majors is a really good spot. I love this new schedule. I love the way, the PGA Championship, brought golf to life in the North in May and kind of made it so all 29,000 golf professionals and members of the PGA of America got the boost from the PGA Championship in May as opposed to August. I think that's where the PGA belongs. I think the U.S. Open is maybe going to start getting its personality back if the USGA allows it, to be our national championship and let the course be the story, not the setup of the course. So if all that works, the crown to me now is going to be the Open because it's the last of the 4 majors. We've got almost, 8 months until another major championship comes up again, and no Ryder Cup this year. So I think it really has the makings of being a phenomenal event. And I know the players are really, really looking forward to it. I've talked to Rory about it. He was out there a couple days ago, I saw, practicing. They are really focusing on that one.
Does the course favor one type of a player, in your opinion, from you being, talking to the guys and then actually seeing the golf course? Is there a certain style of golfer, assuming you get the right weather conditions for your draw and all that good stuff, but is there any one type of player that you think, hey, this guy, you have this kind of profile as a professional golfer, this course is set up perfect for you?
You have to understand how to play the ball along the ground. That is the biggest difference. You have to use the ground. I mean, Portrush is links golf at its absolute best, and that's why you're seeing a lot of players that are going to do the run-up. A lot of guys are playing 3 weeks in a row. The Irish Open is this week. Next week is the Scottish. The week after is the Open Championship. There's a number of players that are playing all 3, and most of the top players are playing Scottish Open now. Tiger isn't, of course, but you're going to see a lot of guys playing the Scottish because you have to adapt to not having the target, be something where you're going to fly the ball to the target and see it stop there. The target is almost never the hole, and you have to learn how to play the ball along the ground. So I love the Europeans there. I look at this Open, and I see McIlroy, of course, because he grew up there. But there's a number of players that we haven't heard a lot about in the majors that I've expected to do better that haven't. One guy that's kind of got my attention is John Rahm. I think this is the style of golf that he could do really well at, and I think he's due to break through in one of these majors, and it might be Rahm's week.
Well, let's talk about NBC. Gosh, you've been with them since I was, I won't say how long, probably close to 30 years now, working with them on the golf and whatnot. And my question is, how did that transition come as you were head golf professional to a broadcaster? And what's maybe one of the more difficult things about learning that craft to make it come off effortless when you are, doing analysis on the golf course or up in the tower? And how did that whole thing sort of come about? And gosh, you've made a great career out of it for a long period of time.
Well, thank you, first of all. It was an absolute fluke, as I said before. It was literally because of one shot I hit in a tournament at Kapalua. We had started a postseason event there back in the early 80s, and I played every year. I was still playing a little bit of competitive golf there, tournaments around Hawaii, and I'd won a few and still could play fairly well. And I played in that tournament every year, and I won a car at the 17th hole in 1985 on NBC, was televising it. And they brought me up to the booth, and it was kind of a joke because Lee Trevino was the analyst, and he didn't think I was that good. He was giving me a hard time, and we ended up having a pretty good banter back and forth in the booth. So this is 85. It's almost, I guess it's 7 or 8 years after I quit playing literally competitively. And they invited me to come back the next day and said, why don't you come back and do a little guest spot in the booth? You're the local guy and stuff. And so I did the next day, and before you know it, they offered me a tryout the next week at the World Cup on ESPN in Palm Springs. That would have been the end of 1986, and I went there and did it, and got offered a job at ESPN, and the rest was history. I worked there 2 years, and then I was on to NBC. And you have to remember that back then, Jason, there was no Gary McCord, there was no David Faraday. I really was skeptical as to whether people would, pay any attention to what I said at all. Why would they believe what Mark Rolfing was saying, given, his record, my Lincoln Highway victory, or, Maui Open, or Hawaii Assistant Professionals Championship, or whatever I had won. Those things didn't stack up very well against a lot of other people who were trying to break into the business. But somehow, I guess I had a knack of communicating, and I was just kind of in the right place at the right time. And here I am, and it's 33 years later. Believe it or not, it's my 33rd year.
So I was 13 years old when you were, we've been watching it on TV for a long time. Was it difficult, or did it come pretty easy to you to have a producer in your ear and then trying to, not talk too much but not say too little like that? That I think it's got to be a difficult thing to make it look, for lack of a better word, effortless.
Yeah, the three most difficult things for me is I tended to talk too much at first. You only have a finite amount of time. The second thing was when I started out as an on-course commentator, and when I'm out there, I do not have a monitor with me, so I know what I'm seeing, but I don't know what the viewer is seeing. And I wasn't able to sort of picture in my mind what the director would be showing, or, I might be going off about talking about a guy's grip, when in fact the story was his ball was buried in a bunker, and they're showing the lie, and I'm talking about his grip or something. So it took me a while to adjust to knowing what was on the screen. But the biggest thing by far that I think you're alluding to, Jason, with the producer in your ear, is that you have to be able to communicate and talk while you're listening at the same time. And I think more than anything, that's what allowed me to become pretty proficient at this, because I learned how to listen. And I tell this especially young people all the time when I'm doing either seminars or engagements with kids that are in communications, or, even when people ask about how do I become a TV guy, the single most important thing is learning how to listen. And that's kind of the way it is in life. Listening is way more important than talking, that's for sure.
Well, you had some interesting characters in your years at NBC, so I'm going to give you, if it's all right, a few of the guys' names, and give me your quick thoughts on each one of these guys, and these are guys who I loved watching over the years, so I'd love to hear your take on it. So, Gary Koch.
Elegant. Hardest preparer I have ever seen. Knowledgeable. Reliable. Never makes a mistake. And I still believe Gary Koch, I played a lot of golf with him in my early years at NBC when we were only televising on the weekends. I still believe he's top 5 best putters I've seen ever.
I had him on the podcast. I was fortunate enough. It was a fascinating conversation.
He's a great
so
man.
smart. Yeah, and it's such. He's got such depth, right, from his playing experience to the TV, and he's seen everything. He was great. Roger Maltby.
Captain Morale. We call him Captain Morale. If anybody's down in the dumps, it won't take long for Raj to cheer him up. Let's see, Faraday has kind of renamed him the Silver Stallion, so we call him Stallion a little bit more now than Captain Morale. But I just loved his style. Just watching him work as opposed to me, particularly in the early years, I walked everywhere. I was running up and down the course, and here's Rod riding in the cart, just he'd get in the cart, ride, get out, walk out, find out how far it was, announce the shot, go back, get in the cart, and then maybe have a cigarette over on the side. And it was just so perfect multi. I love the guy to death. I hope he never retires. He's cutting back a little bit right now, but he is a classic, that guy.
Bob Murphy.
Oh, boy. Murph, he taught me a lot. I love Murph. It's interesting. Somehow Murph got kind of squeezed out as a younger generation of announcers kind of came into NBC. He was just a little bit too early in his career to catch the Golf Channel. Had the Golf Channel been a big force when Murph was around, I think he would have ended up maybe on Champions Tour Golf or something like that. So I hated to see him leave the NBC team, but boy, oh boy, he had a tremendous sense of humor, just a real gentleman. And Gail Murphy, Bob's wife, we just loved her. She was like a sister to all of us in a lot of ways.
And man, he could play too, couldn't he? He went out on the Champions Tour and he had about a 5
he
or 6
was a
year
great
run.
putter. I don't think he was as good as Gary Koch, but he was darn near as good. Murph could fill it up.
Johnny Miller.
No filter. I've never seen a guy in my life that does not filter, what's going on in his brain before it comes out of his mouth. How he didn't say something that ended his career, in those 30 years, I have no idea. Because he could get right to the edge on stuff and somehow, pull out of the nose dive and be okay. But he had absolutely no filter. He had and has the best eye I have seen yet for analyzing the game. He wasn't quite as flamboyant an announcer as some, but he is the best at analyzing a swing before he knows where the ball goes. A lot of announcers, you will hear other commentators analyze a swing after they've seen the shot. That's a big slice to the right. Now they're going to show you why it's sliced. That is not that difficult to do. It's certainly an art, and communicating is important. And the guys that do it now are the absolute best in the business. But still, it's more difficult to analyze a swing and say where the ball went before you know where it went. And Johnny could do that.
The replacement, Mr. Azinger, of taking the tower and being lead analyst. What's your thoughts of having Zinger in the booth?
Oh, really close, and he's got a wife, Tony, just like Gail Murphy. We love Tony to death. Debbie Rolfing, my wife, and her are dear, dear friends, and so they'll be traveling together some. But I love Paul. I don't know. It's a little bittersweet for me because I still wish that Paul Azinger would be a Ryder Cup captain again. I don't understand it. I don't know what really caused the falling out with Azinger and the PGA of America. They just are not chummy anymore. And I think he did a lot for that Ryder Cup and probably still could do a lot for the American Ryder Cup. And I just wish he was part of the Ryder Cup family, but he's not. So now he's our lead analyst, and it's great. The more I work with him, the more I really appreciate how good he is. As you've seen, I've transitioned a lot into the studio now, so I'm about half live golf and half studio, and I would love to see Azinger do a little more studio work. We did some at the Masters together, but he mostly is live golf, but he's just a brilliant analyst and really has some tremendous thoughts, fun to work with, enthusiastic. He wanted the job really badly. He wants to work as many tournaments as he can. I love his attitude.
What stories maybe on the PGA Tour this season, besides, Tiger winning the Masters, and I agree with you, next to Hogan's probably the greatest golf story ever, coming back to win that. But what other stories do you find interesting this year, or trend lines, or things that you've sort of done some research on or kind of piques your interest as you're doing your homework as you go into, prepping for tournaments?
I love the game so much, and I'm getting just old enough that I tend to think about what happened last week rather than what happened last month or 6 months ago. The Nate Lashley story is amazing to me, and it really hit home for me because my father was killed in a plane crash at Meigs Field there in Chicago, which is no longer an airstrip, just down south of the Loop there. And to go through what Nate went through, to have both his mom and dad and girlfriend perish in a airplane accident after having watched him play college golf. I don't know how after 15 years he was able to muster up the strength and energy to keep going and keep playing. He had bounced around from tour to tour, and to come out and beat these guys, these young guys, and beat them the way he did, to me, that's just a phenomenal story. It really is. I love the Gary Woodland story. I have a great relationship with a lot of these players, and I think that's really helped me in my career. But I've gotten to know Gary quite well, and he had a tragedy in his life a couple of years ago, losing one of his twins prior to childbirth with a medical complication, and that was a really difficult thing for him to overcome. And he struggled for quite a while with that, and now he comes out and just blisters Pebble Beach and puts it to him and wins the U.S. Open. That's the great thing about golf. Again, it's a microcosm of life, and golfers are real people. So the stories I tend to like are the ones that have a real personal touch to them.
The other question I was going to ask you, because you've seen so much, is you always hear this thing that the new generation of players is better than the previous generation. They probably said that about the guys in the 90s from the guys in the 70s, et cetera, et cetera. Do you actually believe, taking away the equipment and how much easier it is to hit the golf ball at that level, are the players better today than they were from previous generations, or do you think that's a not a true statement, as you've seen the greats from quite a few generations at this point up close?
I'd say they're better in one aspect. They're better conditioned. They're better trained. They're better physically, and that can make a big difference. We've seen that. But to me, the thing that has really changed the game more than anything else is the technology. And if you take a look at the way these guys swing, and you see a player like Justin Thomas, for example, that somehow has figured out how, at his height and stature and his weight, to hit the ball the way he does by creating absolutely the optimum launch angle, by getting up on his toes and pushing off the ground and launching these incredible drives. That's where the game has really changed. Are they any more talented than players back in my era? No. Are they better shot makers? No. Are they better putters? Yeah, maybe they're better putters statistically because the greens are in better condition.
Right.
Right. 30 years ago, when I was going over to the Open, we'd be putting at Portrush on greens that ran 8 or 9 on the SIB meter. Maybe you just couldn't hold nearly as many putts as they'll be making in 2 weeks. So it's really hard to judge and compare the two. But are they better? I don't necessarily think they're better. I think they're better conditioned and the equipment's better.
Do you miss watching the old game a little bit more, where it wasn't just for the most part power, where they were carving in 5 irons from 183? And was it prettier? Do you miss the shot making ability that a Raymond Floyd had or a Trevino had compared to the power these guys have today?
I do. I miss it a lot. Curving the ball is such a precise business, and it's something that you simply aren't born, I don't believe, with the talent to curve a golf ball. You're born with strength, and you're born with good hand-eye coordination, but learning how to manufacture shots like that, I miss seeing that now. Is the game not as good off because of that? I don't think so. It's definitely a power game now. I don't like the way week in and week out the courses are set up on the PGA Tour. I really think that, driving accuracy is just a ludicrous stat. They might as well not even keep it anymore. It has no relevance whatsoever on the PGA Tour. You look down at the leading money winners and FedEx Cup point winners, none of them are ever in the top 100 really of driving accuracy, but they're all in the top 10 or 20 of driving distance. So I miss that aspect of it. And I think some of that could be brought back. I'm hoping they're going to start doing that at the U.S. Open, for example. I really think that's the only way that we can keep, this game from kind of getting out of control and becoming nothing but a power game. If it keeps going in the direction it's going, I'm just worried that so many of our venues are going to be obsolete.
Yeah, and you're not going to be able to, does eventually Pebble Beach become irrelevant because, in 20 more years, right, there's not a whole lot of land you can use around there, and if the golf course gets too short, sort of like Chicago Golf Club, couldn't host a men's event here in Chicagoland. I would hate to see these iconic classic golf courses not be used because they're just pitch and putts for the modern game, right? I think that's the part I hope they can sort of find the balance of, everyone likes to see the ball go far, but not have some of these iconic clubs not be able to be used for, golfers of the highest level.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. It's interesting to me. I've never heard an amateur golfer, I can't think of one, ever say to me, I'm hitting the ball too far. Darn it, I'm not having any fun. I'm going to quit. You just don't hear that. But when I look at the championship game and the game at its highest level now, and I see us doing things like, and I think Erin Hills was a really great venue for the U.S. Open, but I hate seeing us go to a place like Erin Hills for a U.S. Open instead of, somewhere in Chicago where the U.S. Open should be. We've had 13 of them. There should be another U.S. Open in Chicago. And to me, I hate seeing that the game has changed so much in terms of the actual playing and the holes themselves, but more importantly, in terms of how big a site you have to see or have to have merchandise tents and everything else to have a U.S. Open. I would hate to see it where the U.S. Open can't go to a place like Chicago anymore. It's got to go to southern Wisconsin because there's more space up there.
I agree with you. Yeah, it'll be an interesting debate to see does it eventually become a bifurcation of rules, or how do they eventually address it, right? Because you don't want to kill the amateur game either by making everyone's driver go 30 yards less. But, it's going to...
Yeah, I'm a bifurcation guy, Jason. I'll tell you this. Just take a look at sports for kids, as they grow up through a game like football. The football Tom Brady is throwing is not the same football that he threw when he was playing Pop Warner. That was a tiny one. And then he went to high school football and it got a little bigger. He went to college and it got a little bigger. There's nothing at all wrong with bifurcation, especially when it comes to the equipment. And to me, that is an absolute must. That's really the next thing that the R&A and USGA, I think, needs to do is look seriously at bifurcation.
I would have no objection to it. I think it would be the easiest way to go. Like you said, they do that in Major League Baseball. That's another example, right? Where in college they can use different bats. At the pro level, you got to use a wooden bat with a smaller sweet spot, and it doesn't seem to affect the professional game of people not tuning into it. So I think 1,000% that would be the way to go. And it doesn't hurt the amateurs playing in the sport and making it harder, yet it brings back maybe some shot-making ability and have these classic courses that we've seen for years being played that the guys can still play on it. I think it's kind of solves both problems if they'd ever go that direction.
Yeah, I don't mind seeing the longer hitters have an advantage. I think that's okay. They should if they can figure out how to harness their power and hit it straight enough. But I just don't like seeing shorter players, have the game pass them by. Justin Leonard, who I work with a lot now, I played with him a year ago up at Friar's Head on Long Island when the U.S. Open was at Shinnecock. And I was just amazed at how good he can still play. And yet here he has basically given the game up competitively to go into the broadcast booth because he felt like the game had passed him by. I really think it's kind of too bad if the game passes by a player like that. I'd like to still see that kind of player be somewhat competitive.
Well, I got a couple, 2 or 3 here, and then we'll get you back to back to looking at the ocean, hopefully here. So I've got a couple questions, and they're quick hitters, and then, like I said, we'll get you out of here. And I really appreciate your time today, Ralph. I really do. 2 or 3 best golf courses architecturally you've ever got to play around the world, and what makes those courses so spectacular?
Well, I think St. Andrews is probably the greatest golf course in the world. I really do. I've seen it play a number of different ways over the years. I witnessed John Daly. If you'd have told me back in 1985 that 10 years later John Daly was going to win the Open Championship at St. Andrews, I would have looked at you like you were crazy. But, that's the kind of course that really doesn't favor any particular kind of player. And I love the requirements that St. Andrews puts on golfer, regardless of what your skill level is. I love Augusta National. I watched Augusta National go from what was an iconic course, I think, to a course that was almost unplayable in a lot of ways when they tried to tiger-proof it back in the early 2000s. And to the Augusta National's credit, they realized they had made a mistake, and they were losing the birdie fests and roars on Sunday that they had, and they had made the holes too hard, and they basically geared it back. And now they've got a perfect combination. We think of aesthetics at Augusta, and that's all we hear about, but the shot values at Augusta are really very, very good, very, very high. There's a golf course that I was part of, fortunately, with Bill Coore and Ben Crenshaw back in the early 90s, out in the middle of Nebraska called Sand Hills, which I believe may have the best shot values of any course I've ever seen. And I think if it were on either course, on either coast, East Coast or West Coast, Sand Hills might be a top 5 in America course. It's 10th now. I love Sand Hills for that reason. And then as I left Chicago and before I ended up out in Hawaii, I stopped in Northern California for a few years, and that's really where my heart in sort of seeing golf course architecture and seeing the way holes were built and how they were played and put together, that's where it started. So, I love Cypress Point. That's maybe my favorite golf course in the world. Pasatiempo, 50 miles up the coast, is darn close. I love the golf courses in Northern California. San Francisco golf is just phenomenal. But my heart's still in Chicago. So, I'm going to go back to Shore Acres. I am a Shore Acres guy through and through.
I love Shore Acres after the redo, widening it out a little bit and bringing some of the Seth Rayner originality back to that golf course. I love Shore Acres. The routing that Rayner did on that property is just absolutely phenomenal of how good that golf course is. I could play that one every day of my life. It's so good. Yeah,
I'm with you.
And it's funny you say that about the Sandhills. I'm leaving to head out there to that region tomorrow to Dismal River. So Sandhills is my favorite golf course in the world. If I could, I thought it blew me away the first time I ever played. It changed the way I thought about golf courses and the love of links golf. And I just thought that the architecture that Coore Crenshaw created out there was just, it's phenomenal. And it's okay. The middle of
can
nowhere.
I say to the listeners, Jason, can I tell everybody we did not plan this? When I said Sand Hills, I had no idea whether you even knew what it was or had been out there and played. I'm so happy to hear you played it. But, anybody, if you ever get a chance to play Sand Hills, do it.
Or, like I said, I'm a member at Dismal, what Mr. Nicholas did and Tom Doak did out at Dismal River, which is, about 20-minute drive, but it's about 4 or 5 miles away. I mean, those two courses there, too, I don't know if you played them yet, they're just fantastic. I mean, it's just
I have.
Absolutely...
I love it. I just think, we've got a lot of areas like that in America, and that's where you're going to start seeing, you already are, a trend of people figuring out a way. Sand Hills, we literally, here's one for you, we spent more money on the cart paths at the Plantation course at Kapalua, just the cart paths, than we did on the golf course and the clubhouse at Sand Hills. It's just very cheap when you build in a sand-based area like that, and therefore golf can become affordable. It's still only $75 a year for residents of Hooker County, Nebraska, to play Sand Hills.
Yeah, and it's you don't have to move. I mean, I imagine you guys hardly sculpted any of the. I mean, the holes were just there, right? I mean, minor modifications and knock some sand down and build a green, and there you have it, right? I mean, that's the beauty of it. It looks so natural.
Yeah, we almost built no bunkers. And I think the first routing had 116 holes on it that Bill Core did, and they were going all kinds of different directions. You could have started anywhere and finished anywhere there, literally.
Was that the hardest part of trying to pick the best 18?
Well, the hardest part for me was trying to figure out where the hotel was going until they finally convinced me that we weren't going to be building any hotels there. That was all I knew. I knew Hawaii, and I thought, wow, this would be great. Let's put a hotel here. Obviously, I'm glad they talked me out of that.
Mr. Youngscap said that we're not doing that, right?
He said, you can get right back in that car and go right back to where you came from.
Yeah, there's not going to be a hotel at Mr. Youngcap's club out there. It's like I said, I always, Prairie Club and Valentine is phenomenal. Like if you love links golf, and I tell people, look at me like I'm half crazy, like going out to Nebraska to golf, and I think most people think it looks like Route 80 when you're driving to Lincoln, and I'm like, no, up in the Panhandle, it's all sand. And like I'm crazy enough, I'll drive out to that area 4 to 5 times a year to play for 2 days and drive home because the golf. And everyone you bring out there is blown away, right? You can't explain it until you see it and play it and experience it. And then they all want to go back. They'll drive that 700 miles with me to do it because it's unlike anything that anyone's ever seen. And it's the culture of you feel like you're out west. The people are more than gracious. It's just got this vibe that it's so good. The whole area is just so good.
I'm glad you're going out there. Well, enjoy. I'm jealous.
I'll be out there tomorrow. One last question for you, and we'll get you out of here. Now we've bonded over our love of the Sand Hill region. Favorite golf tournament to cover that's not a major, that maybe a little hidden gem of a city you love going to, or just this event has it downright, and it's always just a joy to kind of go to that event and cover it.
Well, that would be the Ryder Cup, but that's not a little event anymore. That Ryder Cup's become one of the most important golf tournaments in the entire world. I still believe the Ryder Cup at Hazeltine in 2016 was one of the greatest sporting events I'd ever seen of any kind. Just the atmosphere and the way the athletes performed under the pressure, the whole thing was absolutely phenomenal. What's a really cool tournament, Jason, is Travelers. Hartford, Connecticut doesn't even have a hockey team anymore. It's the biggest tournament of the year. It's the biggest sporting event of the year in that entire state, I guess, probably. And the vibe at Travelers is just phenomenal, and they are getting better and better fields every year now. I've always liked Travelers, but I'm partial to Tournament of Champions. Why? I can get up, have a cup of coffee on my lanai, get in my car, and drive about 600 or 700 yards up to the clubhouse, and there I am. So my favorite tournament by far is Century Tournament of Champions.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for spending the time with us. Like I said, I was really looking forward to this conversation, and it's just so cool of everything you've accomplished in golf, and we're also proud of you here, back home in DeKalb Sycamore area. So we'll be watching this year at the coverage of the Open, and thanks for coming on. I really enjoyed talking to you today.
Yeah, and I'll be out at Kish on August 26th, everybody. They've actually named a little high school tournament after me there, so I'm going to come back and say hello to everybody that's playing in the Mark Rolfing Cup out at Kishwaukee Country Club on August 26th. And keep up the good work, Jason. Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll see you out at Kish. I appreciate it, Ralph.